Hello, and welcome to Ancient Text Podcast, Episode 2 of Series 1, Historia Regum Brittanae. Having successfully settled Britain, Brutus went on to have 3 sons, and died after 24 years in Britain. He was buried in Trinovantum, and his sons split the island between themselves in thirds. Locrine, the oldest of them, possessed the middle of the island and was called after him Logera. Another son, Camber, had modern Wales, which of course used to be called Cambria. The youngest son, Albanact, took the north of the island, which was then called Albania, now known as Scotland. Academic etymologists, however, say these place names were coined much later, some during the Roman invasion of Britain. Oh man, wait till we get to that part. The princes ruled peacefully together until Huns invaded, which, this sounds really strange, we're supposed to be in ancient times. And Huns were medieval. Apparently, an ancient invasion of Huns is found in various Celtic myths, however. Which, let's just say that maybe it's a good thing to call barbarians on horses. So let's just pretend these things they're calling Huns are just people on horses that they don't have a better word for to describe, maybe. Anyways, these so-called Huns were led by their king Humber. He killed Albanac in battle, which forced that nation to fly to Locrine for protection. Locrine and Camber teamed up, and with the entire strength of the realm, they came to what would be after called the River Humber, as the Huns were defeated and their king was drowned while fleeing in the river. The Huns had plenty of loot, which was swiftly taken and distributed amongst the men. Among the loot, they found 3 prisoners the book calls virgins. One was the daughter of a Germanic king, who was kidnapped with the others by the Huns. The woman was extremely pretty, and Locrine was very impressed with her and tried to marry. Quirinius was still alive and absolutely incensed, as Locrine had agreed to marry his daughter. Quirinius put on a very threatening act, waving his axe around, and ultimately convinced him to marry his daughter and not marry what Quirinius was calling a barbarian woman. Locrine married Quirinius' daughter, named Gwendoliana. The name's kind of hard. Let's call her Gwen for now on. But Locrine was still in love with the Germanic princess Estrildis. Locrine built her a hidden apartment where she was honorably attended to. Locrine had an affair with her for 7 years out of fear of Quirinius, always using an excuse of attending some holy sacrifices. Everyone knew, except his wife and Quirinius, and everyone kind of sneered at Locrine for his behavior. Estrildis became pregnant and had a daughter named Sabra. Gwen also became pregnant. What the heck, Locrine? What are you doing there, man? You're getting a little, Gwen had a son named Madden, who was put under the care of Quirinius to be educated. After time passed and old Quirinius died, Locrine divorced his daughter and installed his mistress Estrildis as the queen. Gwen was extremely angry about this and went to her native Cornwall, named after her father, remember, and rallied an army, which met an army of Locrines at the river Stour. Locrine was killed by an arrow, and the battle was won by the Cornish army. Gwen took over the entire kingdom, and had Estrildis and her daughter Sabra killed, drowned in a river. Then she published an edict that the river shall be named after Sabra to remember everyone what a piece of shit her dead ex-husband was. This river is now known as the Severn River, and according to Geoffrey, it became Severn through the corruption of the Celtic Sabran. Gwendoliana reigned for 15 years, and her son Madden then became king. The queen retired quietly to rule Cornwall. Geoffrey now tries to give us a reference of time, saying that this happened around the time Homer was alive, which would be around 700 BC. Madden, now king, had 2 sons, Mempricus and Malim, and ruled in peace for 40 years. As soon as he was dead, the 2 brothers quarreled over who got the crown, neither wanting to take a lesser piece of the island. Mempricus held a fake diplomatic meeting for both of them to talk it over. It was a trap, and Mempricus killed his brother. With this, he achieved becoming king and ruled tyrannically, constantly murdering nobles out of paranoia that almost looked like a genocide on his own race. He deserted his wife and son, named Ebrechus, and according to the book, got addicted to sodomy, which can mean a few things, but we're all probably assuming the same thing, right? In the 20th year of his reign, while hunting, he camped in a valley where he was surrounded by wolves that killed and ate him in a brutal fashion. Mempricus, now dead, his son, Ebraucus, who is described as being a mountain of a man, took over as king of Britain and ruled for 40 years. He invaded Gaul and made himself rich by war. With these riches, he built a city on the other side of the Humber, which from his own name was called Cair. He also built a city named Alclud near Albania and a town called Mount Agnid. Ebraucus had 20 sons and 30 daughters by 20 wives. Holy crap, man. And with great valor, governed the kingdom for 60 years. He sent his daughters to Italy where they would marry nobility. Remember that part of the Roman founding myth where they couldn't find any wives at first? I think this is supposed to play into that. Anyways, the sons were sent into Germany, and they conquered the region. Brutus Greenshield, however, stayed with his father and was given the throne, and reigned after that 12 years. After him, his son Lael, a peaceful prince, was given the throne. It was a prosperous reign, and he built a new city in the north of Britain named Carlisle. Lael ruled for 25 years and grew lazy near the end of it, which resulted in civil unrest. After him reigned his son, Hudibras, for 39 years and calmed the country. He built Caerleon, now Canterbury, Calgrion, now Winchester, and Mount Pallador, now Shaftesbury. And apparently at Shaftesbury, Geoffrey said something about like an eagle talking, but he said it was too crazy, apparently even for him, to include in the book. So the next king to rule was Bladud, the son of Hudibras. He ruled for 20 years and built Caerbatus, which is now called Bath. He built the baths there. He dedicated the baths to the goddess Minerva, who the king was very fond of. The king was gifted with magic and taught necromancy in his kingdom. One of his magic experiments backfired, however, when he tried to fly with wings he had fashioned and was smashed to pieces by the impact. After this, his son Lear, yes, that King Lear, that one from the play, yeah, that King Lear, took the throne and governed well for 60 years. He built on the river Soar a city called Carlier, or in English, Leicester. Lear had 3 daughters. He decided to split the kingdom between them, so he got them together and asked which one of them loved him most. His eldest 2 daughters raved on about how much they love him, one saying that she loved him more than her own soul, the other saying that she loved him above all creatures. The youngest daughter pointed out that these were merely acts of flattery and that her sisters were merely power hungry. Lear was incensed at this, thinking she meant that he didn't deserve all this praise. So the 2 older sisters were given the island, and the younger was told that she could only marry outside of the country. The 2 older sisters were given Alba and Cornwall and married to local nobles, with plans for them to split the whole island after Lear's death. After this, a Frankish king... Wait, this is weird again. The Franks weren't supposed to exist at this time frame, just like the Huns earlier. Oh well. Anyways, a Frankish king, Echenippus, had heard of the youngest daughter, Cordia's beauty. He negotiated her hand in marriage and demanded no benefits, i.e. land, etc., from the marriage, so Lear accepted, and Cordia and Agrippinus were married, and Cordia went to go live in Gaul for a new husband. Lear was eventually betrayed by his 2 older daughters and their husbands. They took authority from the king. The only consolation is that Gonorilla's husband allowed him to stay at their property with a staff of 60 soldiers. Eventually, Gonorilla, that's the name of one of the older daughters, by the way, demanded half his staff should be fired as to save money. Seriously though, did Cordelia call her or what? Lear, being incensed at this, went to Cornwall to his other daughter Regale and her husband. He was at first met honorably there. However, eventually again his daughter betrays him and demands his staff should be reduced to 5 people. So he went back to Gonorilla, hoping to receive pity. However, she demanded that he be reduced to only having 1 servant, and called him selfish for wanting to retain his retinue. He was forced to comply and fired all but one of his men. By the time he had begun to reflect more sensibly with himself about the grandeur from which he had fallen, and the pathetic state to which he had now been reduced, he wondered if he should go overseas to visit his youngest daughter. He doubted that it would be a good idea, given he had married her off and not shown her favor. But miserable in his current state, he decided to go to Gaul. On his way, He had a very great monologue where he laments about his decisions and says, while I had anything to give, they valued me being friends, not to me, but to my gifts. They loved me then, but they loved my gifts. Much more, when my gifts ceased, my friends vanished. I'm not doing these entire monologues because, once again, there's an entire play on this guy. Anyways, he arrived in Caricia, where Cordelia was, and waited outside the city while a messenger went to inform Cordelia of the state of ruin and poverty Lear had fallen to. Cordelia cried at this news, and asked the messenger how many men Lear had with him. The messenger replied only one. She gave the messenger money, and told him to take Lear to a nearby city where he would be assigned a retinue of 40 men. This was all done, and as soon as it was done, he sent word to Agrippinus and Cordelia, and told them that he was driven out of his own kingdom, and came to them for help recovering the island. They had a formal meeting, and agreed to give Lear all the armies of Gaul to command until he could restore his kinghood. They successfully invaded Britain, and defeated the traitors he had called family. After 3 years, Lear and Agrippinus died, so Cordelia became monarch, and buried her father in a vault under the river Soar. Cordelia ruled peacefully for 5 years, until her nephews, the sons of her defeated sisters, began to cause trouble. They occupied the same dukedoms their fathers had, and were angry that the throne belonged to a woman. They raised forces in order to rebel against the queen. They fought several battles and wasted the country. The dukes won and placed the queen in prison. She was so aggrieved at this she committed suicide. The dukes divided the island amongst themselves. Everything north of the Humber went to Magran, and everything south and west was given to Cunadagius. After 2 years, restless spirits, ghosts, I guess, had access to Margan and provoked his selfishness and convinced him it was his right to control the whole island. He invaded his brother's half of the country and burnt everything in his path. War breaking out, they met. The aggressor was routed, chased all the way to Cambria before being destroyed. Cunadagius gained the throne of the island, which he ruled well for 33 years. Geoffrey says around this time Rome had been built. After Cunadagius ruled Ravallo. After Ravallo ruled Justus. After him, Cecilius. After him, Jago, the nephew of Justus. After him, King Marcus, son of Cecilius. After him, Gorbogudo, who had 2 sons, Ferrex and Porrex. Ferrex and Porrex quarreled about succession in Gorbogudo's old age. Porrex, who had more ambition, plotted to assassinate his brother. Ferrex figured out the plot and escaped into Gaul. There he procured aid from Sauard, a king of the Franks. However, this time, the good guy loses, and Porrex won. However, their mother, still being alive, hated her surviving son for killing the other. Ferrex was her favorite child. She then assassinated her son Porrex in his sleep. After this time, a long civil war ravaged the country, and the island was under the command of 5 different lesser kings. After a while, a promising young man named Dunwallo Malmutius lived, who was the son of the current king of Cornwall. He excelled all of the kings in Britain in valor and gracefulness. When his father died, the second Dunwallo received the crown of Cornwall. He made war on Yrmir, king of Logria, and killed him in battle. The kings of Cambria and Albania decided to join forces and march into Dunwallo's country and destroy it. Dunwallo met them with 30,000 men. The battle lasted all day. Not being sure he would win, Dunwallo drew off 600 of his bravest men and told them to put on the armor of the slain enemies, which he also did himself. Disguised, they infiltrated the enemy ranks, and once they were by the 2 rival kings, Dunwallo commanded his men to surprise attack. This worked, and the kings were killed. They then switched back to their normal armor so they could rejoin their own ranks and encourage their fellow soldiers to victory, which they quickly obtained. Dunwallo went on to fight until he had obtained the entire island and restored the kingdom of Britain. He then established what the Britons called the Mamertine laws, which are a famous mythic thing, so famous that it's almost definitely real. These laws stated that temples and cities should be sanctuaries, which could give protection to any fugitive or criminal if wanted. The laws also enacted that the ways leading to temples and cities should also be considered sanctuary. In his day, murders and robberies were prevented and the roads were safe. He reigned 40 years and was buried in Trinovantum near the Temple of Concord, which he had built when he established the laws we were just talking about. That's book 2. I hope you learned something. We'll be back in 2 or 3 weeks with book 3.